All right, guys, glad to have you here. It is that time. It's time to do an Xhover Stingy V2 forged carbon build. If you missed it on my Instagram post, I've been selling builds from me, built by me, tuned by me, set up by me. The way I build my quads, they are built to bash. These things are ready to go and shred your bandos, your office parks, and crash hard and come back for another round. So if you're interested in getting one of these, hit me up on Instagram or Facebook, and I'll give you all the details. I'm gonna be taking pre-orders for 5 more, the next round of 5. By the time you see this, I will already be shipping the first 5 that I sold, and all the parts are on their way for the next round. So if you want to get one, hit me up. But today I'm gonna be showing you how you can build your very own Stingy V2 Forged Carbon Edition, just like I do. And as I go through these videos, we're gonna do a build video. Definitely going to do a tuning video, may do a setup video. I'm not 100% on that, but at the end of the day, I'm going to not only have the parts list for you guys of what it is that I'm using, but all of the dump files as well. So if you want to build a quad just like the one that you see me building here, and then also have it fly just like my quad, all you got to do will be to take that dump and put it on your own setup, and you can have a Stingy V2 that flies just like Stingies. All right. Let's talk about what all is going into this quad. This quad is going to be a Stingy V2 Forged Carbon Edition frame with the Hobbywing 60 amp 4-in-1 ESC, a Radix flight controller from Brain FPV, a TBS Crossfire Nano receiver, Lumineer Zip 2207 1750 kV motors, TBS Unify Pro 32 high voltage VTX, the Runcam Lumineer Edition Micro Eagle camera, and the TBS Triumph Pro, and a Immortal T antenna. Now, as you can see spread out on the table here, I have all of the parts that are gonna come in your Stingy V2 Forged Carbon frame. We got 4 arms, a main plate, an under plate, top plate, camera plates, a 3D print that helps hold the your micro camera in place, some foot pads and hardware, as well as we got some soft mounts. If you're using a 20x20 stack, these soft mounts will go in there and kind of help extra soft mount the thing, and a battery pad, you know, your basics. Got these sweet Xhover ESC stickers. The first thing that I'm gonna do is just dive in with the hardware, because the hardware, there's a mix of stuff. It's mostly uniform, but there's a few extra and weird ones. Number one, I separate out the M2, or actually I think they're M1.5. Either way, they're the screws that go with the that hold your micro camera in place, and I just set those aside because I'll be needing them much later. Yep, you got 4 of these little guys. I just separate those out, and then the rest of the screws, there will be 8 screws that are longer. The 8 longer screws are going to be used to hold your main plate, your under plate, and your arms together, right? And so I go ahead and separate those guys out so that we can from the rest, and then your 6mm, I believe these are 6. I'm gonna have to measure them. The shorter screws that are in the kit, you're gonna be using to hold, you know, the top plate on. I also use them for my motor mounts. Daniel sends a ton of them, thankfully, because with the arms being, I believe they're 5mm thick arms, most motors come with hardware that is not going to fit all the way through. All I've got here are 2 cups, guys. One has my long screws and my camera screws, and one has, I'm just gonna put the standoffs and all of the shorter screws in, just to keep things nice and organized. Set those off to the side. Now, before we go on to the first step, let's talk about a couple more tools that you're gonna need. For this section, we're gonna primarily be using an M2 driver, and I like to use Loctite on my main plate. I refer to it as the main plate. If you think about a unibody quad, you have one plate that has all your arms and your main plate. This has a main plate, an under plate to sandwich the arms and the arms. And I consider those, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, those 6 pieces put together as like the base that I built the quad off of. So the first thing that I do is get my arms and that, get my arms and my main plate put together. Since we're building with a 30 by 30 stack instead of, say, a 20 by 20 stack, I am not going to be using all 8 of the longer screws that come with the kit. For the outer hardware screws that go right here, 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 and here, those outer screws that you can see, they're going to be holding the arms together, but they're also going to be what we build our stack off of. And so I have some longer screws that I have purchased. Depending on what it is that is going into your stack, you may be able to get away with like a 25 millimeter. I'll tell you right now, a 30 millimeter long M3 bolt is going to be too long and is going to go through the top plate, right? A 25 millimeter, sometimes with some ESC and flight controller combos that works for me, and on some other ESC flight controller combos, like I need a little bit more room for just components on the board, getting good separation for RF purposes, etc. So I order custom, I've done it with 27 millimeter long screws, and I've done it with 28 millimeter long screws. You could also buy 30 millimeter screws and then snip off the ends. But if you want something exact, I prefer the 27s. These are 28s because I just couldn't find 27s online anywhere at the moment. When I ordered these. Okay, so we're gonna use those longer screws on the outside, and then I believe these are 8 millimeter screws that come with the kit on the inside. They may be 10, I don't know. It doesn't really matter. You're just getting it from the kit. Now, the first thing is get a little bit of Loctite on your first screw. There we go, just a little dab. And then I like to pick an inside hole here. There we go. You can mount these with the stingers from the arm pointing forward or pointing out. They're intended to point forward, and the only way that is going to be important is for the lineup. So the arms, let me see if I can get this so that the camera can see. Actually, this camera can see it pretty good. The arms, the contours, and this plate all line up when they face forward. It's kind of hard to see it, and the main plate. I'll show you when we have them all put together, but if you make sure that your stingers point forward and backwards, and this underplate points forward and backward within the frame, then all of these lines will line up. You can also mount the underplate sideways if you just want to be funky. So don't tighten these down just yet, just kind of get it fitted until we have all 4 arms and all 8 bolts in place. Take your long screw and just kind of eyeball about where it'll be and put a dab of that. It's pretty straightforward. If you screw up this step, you're not going to be able to line up all of the bolts. There we go. We're coming through. Sometimes I like to drop the driver and just get the bit, because that motion there that I'm doing with just the bit will get more rotations than doing this a whole bunch. Okay, then you're just gonna slide in your next arm. Make sure that the stingers are pointed forward as well. I'm gonna grab a couple of these guys out. There we go. Oh, come on. Slide it in. And another reason that you don't want to tighten the screws down too tight as you're putting in all the arms. If you tighten it down really tight, then it's going to be hard to move around the arms as you slide in each additional arm. All right. There we go. And the next arm. Mike in the garage revving that car. All right. See, it's already getting tight. The more arms you get in place, even without tightening down the screws all the way, the tighter this gets. Just kind of manhandle it into place till the holes are lined up. that screw a bit. Yeah, I think I tightened this one. I tightened it down just a little bit too much, and it's making it hard to get my arm in place. There we go. All right. There we go. Last arm. And arm forward. A little bit. And uh-oh, I drizzled some. Whew, my back is gonna be wrecked after this. All right. And now that you have all 4 arms in place, you can go around and tighten down all 8 of those screws. You don't have to like He-Man it or anything, but definitely get them nice and tight. And that Loctite will make sure that they don't come loose later. All right. So I use Loctite for one other section, and that is going to be the standoffs that connect to the bottom half of the quad. I don't like my standoffs to come loose over time, and typically when I put this quad together, the top plate will come on and off very easily, but the standoffs will stay with your base main plate set up like this. Now notice how the contours line up really nice in all of these crevices. The angle that they meet is slightly different on this side than on this side. I don't know, I just like how nice and clean that looks. It was something that I made sure we had in the design phase, and so I want it to look nice on the quad. Okay, so the next thing we're gonna do is we're gonna add on all of our standoffs. Now, as you remember, we had 8 of the longer screws in the kit. I'm gonna take 2 more of those out, and I'm gonna show you why. This is for the Crossfire antenna mount that I use. We've separated out 2 more of the longer screws that came with your frame kit, and the reason that we're using 2 more of the longer screws is the way that I like to mount my Crossfire Immortal T antenna. So I've mounted the Immortal T in the back of the quad like this before, and as you notice, it's kind of like close to the motors. What ends up happening is you'll crash in a tree and you need to turtle mode, and a branch is like push this up into a prop, and this thing gets chopped all to hell. I've mounted it there. I've mounted this thing all over the place. The Immortal T, I've done the Immortal L mount. I used to be a big proponent of that with the stock antenna that comes with your Crossfire receiver, but I've resorted back to this new method. Quad 3D, who provides all of the 3D prints for this build, he was using some of these small little holders. What you do is it slips on, let's see if I can't get it slipped on. It slips on like this, and then like this. And these little arms here, as you see, go on the underside of the standoffs. Now originally he was doing it out the back of the quad, so it's like this, but you end up with the same problem of the antenna being really close and in a place where it easily ends up getting stuck in the props when you're turtle moding and you're stuck somewhere. Where I've found it to be extremely reliable, and I've yet to even lose one of the little ends for an Immortal T since I started doing this, is I mount it right here. So it goes to those 2 standoffs, And the, well, I need to rotate, spin it around in the mount, but, and then it is basically will be right underneath the center section of the frame, and it's pretty much impossible to get in the props. If you bend this up to where it's going to be touching the props, it ends up outside of the prop disc. So I've yet to have it get caught in the props from this mounting position. Now, I use the slightly longer screws on this hold because you're going to be screwing through also the 3D print as well as the frame and everything. So let's grab a couple of standoffs and get these put into place. All right. Oh man, I'm getting it. Anytime you use Loctite, you end up with Loctite freaking everywhere. It's like a guarantee. I should have put this through everything first and then Loctite on it. Such a noob. And screw that down. Okay, one more. Oops. All right, there we go. Put a little bit of Loctite on it. These are very important to Loctite because, as you can see, there's some weirdness that will happen on the bottom side. It's just never going to be as tight as all the other standoffs are tightened down, no matter what you do. So I like to be sure to Loctite it, tighten it up pretty good. That's a little over torqued. When you're working with this, if you screw on this side, you see how it twists the 3D print. I find that once you get it pretty tight, it's not a bad idea to torque it down the last little bit by turning the standoff instead. Just so that we don't rip our 3D print up. And it just helps keep it in the right orientation, etc. Okay. There we go. Nice and tight, nice and tight. And I'll put a little bit of tape on here just to make sure that we don't wear through the insulation on our antenna later. But this will end up coming up through the hole and over to your receiver that will be in the back here later. But for now, I'm just going to leave it coming out the end. And you can see that is how I mount my TBS Crossfire Immortal T antennas. Super, super durable mounting. And I've not had any problems with RF at all so far. Okay. Yeah. Speaking of RF, I'm going to tell you right now, that is not the best mounting solution if you're trying to do long range. But, you know, I don't live in the mountains. I don't do a ton of long range. I am primarily flying in parking lots and office parks, and it is plenty of RF performance for those types of environments. All right. Let's get the rest of these standoffs on real quick. We've got all of our standoffs screwed down, and I just went and grabbed a paper towel because I like to just take a second. You might have like a couple of little areas where you got some excess Loctite. I like to go ahead and just wipe that off, make it sure everything ends up looking nice and clean in the end. Yeah. Anything else? I think that's it. I only had a couple spots that had an extra. now that we have all of our plates put together and our standoffs installed, the next step that we're going to do is go ahead and mount all 4 motors. I like to get all the motors mounted and the wires kind of taken care of before we get into anything else. Now, like I was saying before, the motor bolts that come with these motors in particular are not going to be long enough in order to mount through the thick arms of a Stingy V2 forged. So what you're going to have to do is use some more of these frame screws. But thankfully, Xhover provides you plenty of screws to mount your motors as well, and those should be the perfect length for you as well. One thing to note, just make sure that they're not too long. Whatever screws it is that you're using, when you're mounting motors, that is a very common mistake, is to use screws that are too long, and what happens is the screw will go into the winding, it'll break the seal on the winding, and short out your motor, and when you go to spool it up, you're going to just have a smoking motor. So make sure that you don't have screws that are coming and touching your motor windings. If it even looks like it's close, back it out and get you another screw, or back it out and add a washer. All right, yeah, add a washer at the very least. You know, this is, I mean, it couldn't be more straightforward. We're just gonna put a little bit of Loctite on each screw. A little bit of Loctite, go through a hole. Make sure that you're mounting the motors on the same side that all the standoffs are on. I have made that mistake before. So, not saying anybody's dumb, I'm saying I'm dumb. All right, and I wait until I got at least 2 screws in before I start tightening down. With the motors, you can get away with tightening it down before you have all 4 in, but you definitely need at least 2 so that you know all your holes line up. There we go. Those holes are definitely lined up. Hit them tight. And a couple more. And then you're going to do all 4 of your motors in the same way. So go ahead and finish installing all 4 motors like this. All right, so motors installed. We're gonna do our landing pad prop protectors. Now that you have all 4 of your motors mounted onto our frame, it's starting to look a little bit more like a quad. One thing that annoys me at this stage of the game, now that all the motors are installed, you can go ahead and put away your Loctite. I'm gonna just clean this guy up a little bit. Get the Loctite off the table there, because there is nothing else that we're gonna be Loctiting on the build. Everything that's gonna be fixed to it is fixed to it. I mean, you know, that we don't have to take off for maintenance, etc. Now, the next step that I like to do is to go ahead and apply our padded feet. That way, it's going to sit nice and even as we work on soldering the flight controller, etc. And it's going to also help us route these motor wires, etc. So just flip it upside down. I just eyeball this and usually have pretty good luck. What I like to do is like maybe pick a spot, for instance. That looks good, and then that'll provide, yeah. I'm gonna pick these screws and kind of try to put, maybe not those screws. I'm gonna use the end of the bottom plate here and try to have it not overlap and be any further inside. So I'm just gonna make an imaginary line that is like this, right? Just like that. Hell, I could even do this. Hold that in place and then place it like this. That's basically what we're gonna do. All right, just trying to make it nice and optically symmetric, you know, nothing special. So line those 2 up, line this guy up and place. And then the other side, My antenna is going to be in the way of using the sticker pack to assist on that one. There we go. Yeah, looks good. Come around to the other side. And I'm going to visually do the same thing. There we go. Last one. There we go. Now the next step, this is something that I have typically you see now it sits nice and flush without, you know, no wobble. Yep. And no wobble. Everything is nice and flush on the table, and we can make it easier to do our solder work. Now, the next step that I'm going to do right now is something that I have typically waited till the end of the build to do, but I've realized on my last build that there's no point in waiting to the end. It would help tidy everything up a little bit earlier on in the process. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and that is adding our prop strike protectors. Now, if you want to, you could go ahead and use race wire. I have nothing against race wire, but I have been using little pieces of props over my motor wires for motor wires or ESCs back when we used individual ESCs. I've been doing that for years. This is just pieces of propellers that are chopped up. I like to use the various directions. I have a props in set up, so I like for the flat side of the prop to be at the point where the prop would strike so that it gets deflected off. These two still need to have the tip of them cut off. And I just use a set of dikes to do that. And snip right here, and right here. Throw those away later. The tape that I use, so in the past I have used electrical tape on these motor wires, and it helps to hold your landing pads on so that those don't get ripped off. If you don't put tape over them, then they will eventually just fall off. I do have like spares that I keep around, you can get on Amazon. But I've found that if I tape them on, they almost never fall off. Your little piece of prop protector stays there forever. And electrical tape works really well for that. But there's a tape that I like a lot better, and this is gaffer's tape. It is a fabric tape with an adhesive similar to duct tape, but it's much cleaner, much easier to tear, not that heavy. I mean, it's probably heavier than electrical tape, but I find that it's way more durable, whereas the electrical tape would end up scraping off of the underside of the landing pads, and then they would rip off. This, I can literally skid on concrete with these landing pads, and it's basically like my skid plates. And it almost never wears out. The other benefit, I'm going to be using it in the back to wrap our the receiver and the VTX at the end of the build. If you need to unwrap it to rebind the receiver or do something else, I find that it comes untaped. You can unwrap it, do what you need to do, and then still use the same piece and wrap it right back up, and it's good to go. If you look at my quads, this one right here, I've been doing a lot of testing with the Tango 2 and having to like rebind and flash and everything. And this piece of gaffer's tape right there, I have taken off and put back on so many freaking times, and it is still like, it just works. You can see that I've got some muck and whatnot. This one is starting to tear from some prop strikes. I probably could put some fresh gaffer's tape on my ESC protectors. But so what we're going to do here is you just take a piece of gaffer's tape. I like to go, it ought to be about yay long. And put it right here on your piece of prop. Get your motor wires for the arm that you're going to do nice and flat along the arm. Like I said, I do it so that the flat side of the piece of prop is towards where the direction of travel for the props. And then just line it up with your foot here. Wrap the foot, back up around, and that length worked out just fine. Boom. And now you got a nice, neat little thing. Prop protector and everything. All right, next one. Just gonna go around the quad. Yep. One thing to note here when you're doing this is I like to keep the motor wires very straight and not crossing underneath this. Mainly, it isn't about the wires crossing or being aesthetic. It's so that I can make the motor directions uniform. That way when I swap a new motor on, I just know that the wires go 1, 2, 3 from the motor to the pads in the same connection order, and I don't have to reverse motor direction for a motor swap. So just one little thing to note. All right, and our last one. Okay. There we go. And now we have all 4 of our motor wires taped up nice and neat. See? Much better. Now that we have our motors mounted and the wires taken care of, it's time to move on and get our Hobbywing ESC all prepped and in place. Now, the first thing I'm gonna do is a little bit counterintuitive. You may be thinking, oh, we're gonna put it in place and solder up our motor wires and all of that, which we definitely need to do, but there's one other step that I do first. Now, if you look at my build here, the way that I'm going to orient the ESC is going to be with the capacitor forward, our connector in the rear, and my VTX is also going to be in the back. The way that I power my VTX is directly from battery power. Now you could attach wires up here where your battery leads are, but it also has pads for each of your motor signal pads, and also repeat battery pads back here in the back. Now, if you solder it onto the top here, it's going to block that connector. So I don't put it on the top, I put it on the bottom. That's why we're gonna have to make this connection before we even put the ESC into place. Now, you can see right here in front of the multi-connector, all of the labels for what each of these pads are. The very first top pad is not connected. This one right here, not connected. Then this one is ground and then battery. So we're gonna solder ground and battery to our ESC connectors. Got the soldering iron hot, got some solder. Now remember, Kevin, top is now bottom. So it's ground and battery. When I did my last build, I got those backwards at first. All right. Iron's hot, coming down off the bottom, skip one, then the first 2. So we're gonna just tin these 2 pads right here. Come on, you can do it. The Hobbywing ESC has a conformal coating on it, and so you kind of have to get get it kind of heated up in order for it to melt off that conformal coating. And take solder. Whoa, don't be flicking solder, Kevin. That is not good. There we go. That's one done. And two. All right. And then I'm going to grab the connector for my Unify Pro 32 high voltage here. I'm just going to pull the connector out for right now. And this is the lead that we want. Is that power and ground. And I'm just going to snip it right about there. Leave plenty of wire for the lead, but if you look, the connector side of the VTX is going to be towards the front anyways, so that's plenty of wire in order to connect the two. And then just strip off a little bit of the insulation, and we'll tin these wires. And just to double check, it is ground and then battery. Okay, there's all of that done. Stick them in the air. I really like these needle nose pliers for holding wires while I'm soldering. Okay. Now, one thing that I like to do when I am building is check that I haven't shorted things out and do it frequently. So we just soldered something that has to do with the battery connection. If this is shorted, that will be very bad. You can check at your main battery leads, and you notice that we don't. There is no... That beep briefly is because the capacitors fill up with voltage when you do a continuity check between the two, and so as you switch leads, it'll just beep for a second each time. And it would beep if it was shorted out over here, because this is a direct connection to the battery, as you can test via a continuity check. If we check the positive to positive, that is direct continuity. The ground to ground, also direct continuity. So I did not short out our battery. Let me just make sure I didn't short it to any nearby pads. Nope. And nope. All right, so we're good to go there. The next thing to do is to get this guy in place. Let me, now, one thing that I use a lot on my stacks in order to separate things are these O-rings right here. Now, I get these from Amazon. They're just silicone O-rings, nothing special. I believe it's, I forget the size. I'll make a link down in the description to where you can get some for yourself. Now, for each build, I use 8. I've found with this particular stack, I could get away with no O-rings underneath the ESC. Like, it's not really touching the any of the hardware. But I just feel like it's so close that in a hard crash, you might end up knocking off a component on the underside of the ESC up against some of these press nuts. So I like to put one O-ring on each of the standoffs before I put the ESC down. All right, let's get these motor wires kind of out of the way. All right. So, 1 O-ring per motor wire. 1 O-ring per standoff, I should say. All right, and then we can just slide our ESC on down here. Now you can see if we look at the separation that you get, you have nice isolation from the board. Tons of room, right? Cool. So you got that guy there. And the next step is going to be just tin all of your motor pads. So all of these pads, and we'll go ahead and tin the battery pads as well. And I'm just gonna heat them up, dab some solder. Now, if you've never built a quad before, you may be new to soldering. Quick tip, you don't wanna touch the pad with the iron and then immediately apply solder. You want to touch it, give it a second to heat up, and then touch it. So, bop, bop, bop. You kind of get the feel for the pace. So touch, go. Touch, go. Now, the battery pads on your 4-in-1 ESCs, these are going to take a ton more heat than the rest. Unfortunately, it's just kind of the way it is. So touch it, give it a good second or 3, and you see that the solder is already hardening on there. Just be patient and know that it's going to get hot. Do a little bit and then wait a second and keep, swipe your iron back and forth. Make sure you get it nice and evenly heated and applied. There we go. You got a nice pretty solder bubble there. Is that the ground side? Yeah, ground's usually the worst on these guys. And let's get the positive. We're not going to connect our battery lead just yet. I don't need any more extra wires up in here. All right, and that'll do. I'm gonna go ahead and unplug the soldering iron for a second because we need to trim all of our motor wires. If you take a look at the current setup, you see that we have wires way over there. If I were to solder it on, we got wires that can get caught in props. It's not an ideal setup. For my motor wires to the ESC pads, I like to keep these straight, and that, just like we were making sure that we didn't have crossed motor wires underneath the our prop strike protectors, you want to make sure that they come out the other side nice and straight. Now, since we've already taped down the motor protectors, or the prop strike protectors, the little piece of prop here, we have a much better idea of how the wires are going to route. That's why I've done it in this order this time. When I built my last one, I did it the opposite way. I did all the motor wires and then I covered them up, and I ended up with a little bit extra play in the wires than I necessarily needed because I wasn't sure just where the motor wires were going to get routed. So what you want to do for these is kind of loosely take it across the motor pad, and then just the other side of the motor pad, snip it. Just like that. Come on, snip, nice and clean. And then you go to the middle one. Make sure that you don't snip it next to the wrong pad. Make sure you're snipping it by the pad that it is actually going to connect to. Can't have no ugly setups. And then to this one. it's not a bad idea to leave a little bit of extra room so that we can have multiple room for connections later. And just go ahead and pull off a little bit of that silicone insulation. I like to bend them kind of away from the ESC right now because we are going to have to tin all of these wires, and I don't like to have the wires over top of the ESC when I'm tinning them, because in that case you can end up with some solder drippage on your ESC and kill it. Little solder balls on the ESC are bad news. Snip, snip. All right. This guy. And this guy. Go to that one. Go other side, and just kind of try to get your VTX connector wires out of the way for now. We'll take care of them in a little bit. All right, now before we start tinning the motor wires, like I said before, just make sure that the wires themselves aren't over top of your ESC. It'll save you a lot of headache later. And heat up the iron. All right. If you get a lot of buildup of solder on your iron, go ahead and all right, and all of the motor wires are now tinned, and we are ready to just connect them up. So, ooh, that's still hot. Come in here. I like to try to hit it from the angle so that we've got plenty of room for each of the subsequent wire connections. And you can just make your way around the ESC. I like to start with the forward or rearward most connector, and then do the others. And there we go. Now we have all of our motor wires connected. One of the things that comes with your Hobby Wing 4-in-1 ESC is a XT60 connector. So I'm going to pull that guy out and we're going to solder him on. Now, one thing to note with this is that the solder that comes from the factory on these guys is it takes a lot more heat to melt it, and it's kind of a pain to work with. So one thing that I like to do with these is just to trim a little bit of extra of the silicone insulation off, expose just a little bit more wire to work with, and then also to put some solder on here that is going to be easier to melt. Because as I showed you before, the battery pads on your 4-in-1 ESC take a lot of heat in order to melt. Looks like my battery's still good on that thing here. And also, if this is taking a lot of extra heat to melt, it's kind of a no-win situation. So before we get going with the soldering it in place, we're gonna just hit it with some tin it a little bit better. All right. And be careful. One thing to keep in mind is don't over tin this. If you add a whole ton of solder, and it's going to seep in inside of the silicone sleeved portion of the wire, and you will have, after you solder it, you won't be able to bend like the first portion of the insulated section of the wire. So you don't want it to seep in too far up there, because we want to still have a malleable wire. All right, that should be good. Okay, and now for the fun part. Make sure that we get the polarity right, so positive on this side. Let's see if I can get... What I'm going to try to do here is... Yep, see, we already have this one. It's already got a bit of a kink. All right, so I'm going to try to route the positive wire underneath of our capacitor here. Okay. Now we need the ground side. And I am going to slightly change my plan here. And we're going to trim this guy and change exactly where it's connected. Ooh, that's a hot iron. Actually, yeah, it's still a hot iron. Yes. Yeah. Beautiful. Beautimus. Okay, that is a nicely flowed pad. Let that cool before I start trying to move it. And I think we have us a winner. Yes, sir. And that should be just enough wire. Yep. So we'll have a battery strap on the back section and a battery strap right about here, and that will be over top, and we'll strap down this and it will be perfectly in there. Love it. Coming out well. Okay. And you may be concerned about the props. Really, the props are the closest right here. The props only come into about that area on this section. Shouldn't be a problem there. Okay. So that is, the ESC is fully soldered up now. Ready to move on to the flight controller. All right. Now, your Radix from Brain FPV is going to come without any of the gummies installed. So the first thing that you're going to have to do is install your gummies. Now, the Radix flight controller, these gummies, you'll notice, are taller on one side than the other. So what you want to do, this is the top side of the flight controller. That's the bottom side with the SD card. Top side has the USB port. Go ahead and make sure that the thick side of your gummies is on the bottom of the flight controller. That'll give you the most separation from your ESC to keep the noise to a minimum. And just kind of poke it in through there. There you go. That one is good. Go around and get all of your gummies installed as such. I find it's pretty easy to do with just like a M2 driver. Okay, for my builds, the arrow is pointing you forward this way, as you'll see, but I don't like having the USB port on the same side as my battery plug for, it just gets in the way sometimes with builds. So I prefer to set it the other way. We'll have to rotate that in post, and we have 4 more O-rings that are gonna pop on right here to give us separation, and 3 and 4. I use the ESC wire, yeah, unfortunately I can't use the shortest one because it just doesn't quite reach the way that I need it to. I actually have to use the longer ESC wire here, but you can go ahead and plug that in, make sure that you have it lined up properly, and plug it in there. All right, all plugged in. My camera, I power the camera from the VTX, and so this is going to go all the way up. For the VTX, one other thing to note, where's it at? Let's pull it out. So this is the TBS Unify Pro 32 high voltage. Be sure that as soon as you get this, take the USB port, connect it to your computer, and update the firmware. The older firmware version on these had an issue where they would brick. So before you power it on or do anything else, make sure that you update the firmware. You can do that by downloading the TBS agent from TBS teamblacksheep.com and connect it to your computer and update it. I'm going to do that right now while I am thinking about it, because I don't want to brick no VTXs. Dude, sync snap. And so what we're going to do is you take your TBS Unify Pro 32 high voltage and load up Agent X and connect it like so. I'm just going to plug it into the USB port, and there it is. Click Manage Firmware. You see that there's a release 1.1.3. Click Update, start the update, and we are off to go. Boom. It's just going to take a couple of seconds, and then once it's fully updated, we'll come back to the build. Just wanted to make sure I took care of this right away so I don't forget anything. Writing is complete. Now it's going to verify. Verifying is complete, and the update is complete. Real quick, while we're over here, you can see that in our settings, these are some things I'm going to change because I'm not wiring it up with CRSF to the receiver, which is an option, but I feel like Betaflight has a lot of really cool options going on as well now. It's so hard to decide because the crossfire control with the receiver allows you to change things with your currently with your crossfire module, also with stick commands, more so for that on the Evo, but there's going to be cool stuff coming with the Fusion, but right now I feel like it's just more solid to work off of smart audio directly to the flight controller. So that's what we're going to be doing, is we're going to go to smart audio. Mic is on the VTX. I'm going to go ahead and put this on race channel 8. Go 8. And I want it at 1 watt. Granted, it is still going to be, if you look here, the VTX is still locked. We're going to have to unlock it in a little bit, but that's not a big deal. All right, and let's unplug it here. Right here, since we're only using the crossfire, the smart audio, we don't need the second to the outside, so that green pin I can remove. So I'm going to go ahead and pull that wire real quick. Just use like an X-Acto knife here and pop this guy up. pull the green wire. Come on, get out of there. And green wire is gone. Now, if you notice on this flight controller, our video, where is it? Video in and video out are in the back, right? And so I just kind of eyeball the distance that we need from the on the video wire and kind of clip it right about here. That ought to be plenty. Yeah, looks good. Clip it. And then I take the power wires for the camera and just run them on the underside of the flight controller. All right, and now we can tin the pads that we'll be using on our flight controller. About to need a new battery for my iron. Okay, I'm getting hot. You only got a few more solder connections to do, and then we're done with the soldering. So here we go. We're hot. So we're going to do this ground in the back. That's going to be the ground for our crossfire receiver. We're going to do this 5-volt pad. Going to do the video in. Going to do the video out. Going to do RX1. Well, I got that backwards. TX1 and RX1. That's where we're going to connect our crossfire receiver. And then up here on TX3, I'm going to tin that one. That's what we're going to connect smart audio to. And that's going to do it for our connections. Let's go ahead and take care of this video wire on both ends. Okay, tin it. And there we go. Don't want it flicking solder on the flight controller. Okay, so video in, that's the camera. That's gonna be this guy back here. The Radix has lots of cool video overlay. It has its own OSD features. You can put all sorts of cool stuff in there. So I definitely want to have it hooked up with the OSD for the Radix. All right. Oh, wait. There we go. All right. And last but not least, connection-wise here, is going to be our smart audio. Snip. And tin this guy. There we go. And now all the connectors for our VTX are done. I'm going to pop the flight controller off one more time to go ahead and connect the ESC connector. Boom. Be very careful pushing that in, that you're not bending any of your connectors, any of the pins, I mean. Make sure that the power for the camera is going between the two. And there we go. Perfect. Now I like to, so I'm going to go ahead and put some nylon nuts on top of the flight controller stack because that doesn't need to be coming off anymore. We can go ahead and lock it down and it'll be good to go. All right, now your VTX from TBS is going to come with a MMCX to SMA adapter. Now, the only problem with this is that the straight adapter is going to stick out of the rear of the quad and cause a problem. So I get, where are they at? I order these guys from Amazon. It's a 90-degree MMCX to SMA adapter, and that is going to pair with the 3D print for the antenna mount that I got coming out here. So the way that this is going to fit all in place is you pop the MMCX in, and we are going to have our, this is going to go right between the standoffs. It's a nice tight fit in there. And this is going to wrap around, and there's a 3D print that is going to go and hold the SMA connector right there in place. All right. Now, it kind of helps. If I look at my other build, I remember that I had to kind of cockeye it just a little bit. So you can see that this one, where it's already kind of put together, it's off just ever so slightly. I want to make sure I do it the same direction and everything. So we give it a little bit of extra room this way, and that is going to make it easier to get the nice loop around that way. Okay. Now, I'm just going to get some double-sided sticky tape to do that job. Already pre-cut to size. So we'll take some. Okay, I should have plenty of time on the camera. I'm going to change battery here shortly. All right. So that. Put it on the underside like so. Very good to go. Go ahead and plug her in. Peel the backing. Now, make sure we get all of the wires out of the way. Push it forward. And a little bit offset, just like so. And that ought to work just perfect. Yep, got access to the button here, got access to the USB port on the other side, and plenty of room to mount our receiver. Let's get the 3D print and we'll tighten it, the SMA connector down to the 3D print. Again, all of these prints are available at quad3d.com. There we go. We'll leave a GoPro mount out for it. Okay. Just like that. And then throw on our lock and a washer and the nut. Now, if you didn't know this, SMA, the SMA size is the same as your prop nut. So any prop tool that you've got will also tighten these up. Ooh, don't rotate on me now. There we go. Get it nice and tight. Mount it in there to the 3D. Print it, the TPU. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and add the antenna on, just so that if I start powering it on to test things here shortly, I'm not gonna be smoking our VTX. All right, there it is. Now you can see that there's a little hole right here, and that's where we're going to thread the receiver antenna. I'm going to pop this off for now because we're going to pull it up and then we're going to put that lead back down. Now remember I said that I like to protect the that receiver antenna so that it doesn't wear through abrasion. We're going to just take a little piece of our gaffer's tape, flip over the quad, and right here where you're going to start seeing just the area that is going to get rubbed, you can kind of measure it, and we're just going to wrap that around, and that'll give it some protection to keep it from wearing through the insulation on the antenna. Poke it through, you see? Got some nice padding just like that. And bring this side down. There we go. Boom. So the next thing that we need to mount, which is going to be the last thing to solder into place, is going to be our Crossfire Nano receiver. Now, these guys are freaking tiny. Gonna go ahead and just pop her out right like that. And I'm gonna solder the wires onto this thing in there. I'm gonna solder the wires to it on the bench, and then we'll mount it and solder the other end to the flight controller itself. Let's get it ground and positive. There we go. 4 wires. And now the square, some of the early Crossfire Nano receivers, the square was not actually ground. They kind of screwed it up, but the newer ones, the square is on the far end and it is also ground, as it should be. And just tin these pads. You know, you could do this as a through hole. I prefer to just treat them like solder pads. I have a lot better luck with wires not breaking off this way. So that's what I always do. All right. And then we're gonna go ground. This guy is so freaking tiny. It's ridiculous. Ground. 5-volt. And I don't remember off the top of my head whether it's TXR, which order the two go, but it doesn't matter. We're just going to use the yellow and the white to keep them coordinated and in order. Boom. All right. And now we got all of the wires soldered in place on our receiver. Now, I'm also going to double-sided sticky tape this guy down. I got a little piece already mostly cut over here. Let's see, what do I got that I can cut it on? Let's just do it in the air. That's not working. Here, I'll cut it on this. My table's too nice to be cutting on. That's a custom Stingy built workbench, and oak butcher block, and I finished it myself. I don't want to like mess it up. Right. Boom. And now I'm just going to be putting it in like so. Kind of like it about right there. That would be ideal. All right. Let's pull the backing off. Okay. And get it in position right about there. Perfect. And get to snipping and soldering. All right. So our ground's going to go here. Whoa. Our ground is not soldered in place very well. No, I'd rather find out now than later when I'm trying to fly it. All right. All right, I have to Google which one is the TX and which one is the RX because I never can remember off the top of my head. Okay, so the first one we have is TX, which is going to go to RX. And then the RX is the fourth pin on the crossfire, and that is going to go to a TX on the flight controller. TX1 in this instance. Boom. And now we are fully wired up. There's only a couple other little things that we're going to have to take care of. Number one is going to be mounting our run cam. So we're going to do that next. And then I will show you about remapping the motors, because since we didn't install the number one, this ESC is designed to be a different orientation. The flight controller's design is intended to be going a different direction. So we're going to have to rotate the flight controller and reassign the motor pins. I'm going to show you guys how to do those two things. And then that's going to be pretty much it for this build. One other thing to note is that the TBS Unify comes with a 4-pin connector for your camera, and the hole on this camera is 3, so we're going to have to replace this connector as well. Let's do that first. I'm just going to grab I'm going to grab the wire that came with the run cam, and all I do here is use my X-Acto knife to get the pins out of it. All right. It's kind of a little bit tedious of a thing to do, but if you've been around mini quads for any length of time, or you plan to stay around mini quads, you're going to have to repin some stuff. It's just bound to happen. All right, there's 1, 2. Ground goes in the middle. Video on the left-hand side, looking at it. There we go. All 3 pulled. Now let's come down here to this guy. Come on. There you go. There's those 4 out. So, there we go. They're all nice and snug in there, and we're good to go. Okay, the next thing that we're going to do is to get our RunCam Lumineer Edition RunCam Micro Eagle. Oh my God, so many different things into its mount. You need your 3D print and you need your camera plates. Now, as you notice, you may be able to see from this overhead shot, these slots are not quite centered. They're a little bit off, and you got a slot here. Now, the reason for this is that the distance between this hole on your camera and the back of the camera itself is different for various cameras. In particular, your RunCam here, it is one of the highest ones. You see the hole lines up all the way up. But for like a RunCam Micro Swift, it'll be closer to the back of that, and these slots are just to allow for various size cameras. Now, this whole little rig that I came up with is very good at making sure that once you set your camera angle, it never changes again. Now, we're gonna go back to our teeny tiny screws that came with the frame. I'm gonna grab all 4 of those. 2, 3, 4. Now, they are great length for the rear one, but the 2 in the front need to be trimmed ever so slightly. So what I do is I take my big dikes and I just get like the first thread or 2. I don't know if you can see that, but not very much at all, just a very little bit. Make sure that you don't, ideally wear eye protection. Don't be an idiot like me. I got sunglasses in here. I'll put on my sunglasses. Boom. I got eye protection. And I also just close my eyes. I'm weird about protecting my eyes, and we're gonna get this snip and do one more in the same way. All right, and cool. And now we're nice and snipped. Like I was saying earlier, these slots are a little bit offset. You want the slot to be on the top side of the camera when you insert the screw. Now, the screws untrimmed on a Micro Eagle, they will just bottom out and you won't get it fully like snugly tightened in. On like the Swift, they work fine. Try it on your camera. If it won't screw all the way in, you'll just have to back it out and snip off a little bit of the end. So I'm going to go ahead and slide that one in. I'm not going to tighten it down, like crank it down or anything just yet, because as you notice, you can line up the rear one right like that. And so I'm going to get one of the untrimmed screws for the back, and I'm going to keep these nice and loose right now. What I do is I get them on very loosely and then put the top plate on. And once everything is in place and I like the angle, then I tighten down the camera screws so that it won't move. So right there, still nice and loose. Other side, get my shortened screw. Make sure that the high side is going to the top of the camera. And then put in here. Leave it a little bit loose. And do the back screw. Now you'll notice as you're doing this that you may have the camera get a little bit, the 3D print might come a little bit off the back of the camera. Just make sure that it's nice and pushed snug up in there when we tighten down the screws. And go ahead and plug in our camera too while we're at it. Whoa, don't go screwing up my pins. Pins are fine. These plugs are so dang tight. There we go. Got it. And just get it into the slots for the camera plates. Got plenty of wiggle room on. Make sure capacitor's not getting banged around. Perfect. I'm going to put on the top plate and I'm only going to put in one screw to hold it in place. This is just to get make sure everything's lining up, and we're not locking the camera in with like offset plates, etc. And I'm going to grab one screw to hold the top plate and make sure it's fully, whoop. Okay. All right, so I've got one screw holding the top plate in place as I adjust my camera angle. It is a tight fit in there with the capacitor, but you can see that if you look at that camera angle, that's about the 25 to 30 degrees that I prefer. I could maybe make it a little bit steeper if I just tweak the position of that capacitor. I'm going to go ahead and tighten up out the rest of our screws to where, and then the camera shouldn't move whatsoever after that. Let's get the other side. Okay. And the back one. Boom. And now it doesn't matter how hard we push on it, it is not going anywhere. All right. While we have this guy on, I'm just going to go ahead and apply our battery pad. It's got a plastic covering that you'll have to take off on the other side. Take off the adhesive side and stick it down. And then I'm going to leave this piece on for now, and I'll take that off later. All right, there we go. Now, one more thing that needs to get done is taping up this back section along with this guy. So we're gonna put the antenna, attach it to our receiver here. Just push that line, get it lined up, and push it down. There we go. Popped on. Now you see though, we have like a big gap right here with the, oh actually that one's gonna work out nice just like so. I don't even have to worry about it. Okay, good deal. So we're gonna do that, and then we come over. Some kind of trucks out there. Okay. Nope, school bus. All right. I'm going to use one more piece of gaffer's tape here. All right. On the underside. Okay. There we go. Get out of the way. I get to end on the top. So we're going to put it like that. so. Now to make it easy for binding, etc., I like to cut out just a little square right here. The bind button on the micro receiver is right in front of the, there you go. Come here. There we go. And we got a little hole. I like just, it's not waterproof, guys. It's not heat shrink because it makes it a pain to bind. And these are going to be shipped to people who are going to need to bind them. So I just want to make it nice and easy and clear where the button is that you're going to press to do the binding. And the tape is really just there to make sure that none of this moves around in case of a crash. So I'll slide this down like so. And go ahead and put our top plate back on. Boom. Now, I'm only going to secure it with the back four. I need to get, I don't have them handy, but the screws that I use to hold the GoPro on, I use longer ones, not, maybe these 10s would be enough. I've got 2 of those, but I've got a whole other set of hardware somewhere around here. So I'm just going to put these 4 on. And then we're going to remap the 4 motors and change the direction. And I'm going to leave it at that for our build. All right. 2, 3, 4. Oops. Come here, buddy. Hey, Jumper. What you doing? Yeah, come say hi. Quit being all weird and fighting your brother. Okay. Boom, boom. Oh yeah, that's working out right nice. Right nice. Okay. So we're gonna come over here to Beta Flight. Before I plug in any batteries or do anything, one last check of the battery connector to make sure. Yep, no short over the battery lead. So that should be good. I am gonna use a smoke stopper on my first plug-in. Got a smoke stopper right here to plug in for the first time, just in case there is something. That will power down. Perfect. No smoke without it either. Good to know. So now the next thing that we're going to do is remap our motors and change the motor direction. Now I'm not going to get into the full-on programming for this, but I feel like this is part of the build because of the way that I align my ESCs and flight controller, that this is an integral part of the process. So plug it in. Should be auto connect set up. And as you notice here, it's actually reversed to what is occurring on the quad. That's because we have the quad backwards here. So we come in here and on the yaw, we're going to, I'm gonna put 180 degrees because we reversed it. Save and reboot. And now when I raise the nose, it ought to raise the nose there. So that's the first thing that you're gonna change. Next up is going to be on our motors tab. What we're going to do is we're going to make a note of which motor spins with which, it's going to be wrong, let's just say. So you're going to click here, I understand the risks. And when I spin motor 1, that should be the rear right, but it is not. It's the front left, which should be number 4. I'm going to do this, right? So we're just going to write this out. So 1 was in the front top left. 2 is bottom left. 3 top right. And 4 will be bottom right, but we're just going to double check. There we go, 4. Now it should be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, as is shown on the screen here. Now the way that we're going to fix that, I'm going to go ahead and unplug the battery because we don't need that for a second, just in case something freaks out. We're going to go over here to the CLI, and we're going to type resources. Oops. Resource. Boom. And there are all of the resources and what pin they are mapped to. You can see that at the very top of the list, motor 1 is at AO2, motor 2, AO3. And so what we really need to do, as you can see from these numbers here, is we need to swap 1 and 4 and swap 2 and 3. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to make this easy on myself, I'm going to copy a line, and instead of being AO2, I'm going to say none. Boom. So that freed the pin, because if we try to assign the pin and it's already assigned to something else, it won't let you reassign it. So now we've freed pin AO2, and we're going to assign motor 4 to AO2. So I'm just going to come over here and put 4. Boom. And now motor 4 was on A15, so we're going to make motor 1 A15. And we've swapped those two. So now we're going to take motor 2 and make it none. And motor 3 will use the A10, which was the pin that motor 2 was connected to. Wait, nope, I got that backwards. A03 is what motor 2 was connected to. Boom. And now motor 2 will be A10, which is what motor 3 was connected to. 10, save that, oops, boom. And that's gonna kick us out and reboot Betaflight. For some reason, the auto connect doesn't work well when we have a reboot, so I'm just gonna cancel it and reconnect. All right, connect our motors. And now when we spin motor 1, it should be the back right. This one, yes. Should be the front right, yep. Back left, yep. Front left, yep. And we're good to go. Now, one more thing that we need to do here is we are going to spin all 4 motors just lightly, and I'm going to check the motor direction. That one, motor 3 is wrong, motor 1 is wrong, motor 2 is correct, and motor 4 is correct. So I need to change motors 1 and 3 direction. All right. So let's stop that. Disconnect here. Run BL Heli 32 suite. And select the modem, connect, read the setup, boom. And it's 1 and 3 that we need to reverse. So I'm going to reverse 1, write the setup. Oops, not 2. 3. Reversed, right setup, boom, disconnect, come back over to Betaflight, connect back in, go to our motors tab, select all, and correct Correct. 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 And that is going to do it. Now, the last couple of things that we got to do in order to get this one all mounted up is to mount our GoPro and some battery straps, and that's it. It's ready to rip. Where's the battery strap at? There we go. I like to make sure that the strap side is on the non-battery connector side. Oh yeah, get that in there. And do one more. So we got our 2 battery straps. So I'll just go ahead and insert your 4 screws. I've got, I think these are 12 millimeter long M3 bolts in here with just a little bit sticking out so that it'll line up with the holes on the frame. We'll go ahead and mount up a China Hobbyline 1100 6S pack. This is one of the 2 that I've been running primarily, the 1100 and the 1300 Black Series from China Hobbyline. Thank you, China Hobbyline, for these batteries. They are much appreciated and fantastic batteries. All right, and just mount these up just like so. Get it kind of flush in the back. Then my XT60 lead here. And we can just do a little reach around with the XT60 connector. Just like so. Pow! Right in the kisser. And we're good to go. That is it for the Xhover Stingy V2 Forged Carbon Edition build. Any questions? Isn't she a beaut? I just love how the forged carbon looks with the gaffer's tape. I feel like they complement each other well and look super rough and raw. All right, and that is gonna do it for our build. As you notice, this is a super sleek. We've got the TBS antenna doesn't even stick out past these the arms, so it's pretty much impossible unless you hit a branch or something to hit this antenna. It doesn't it's not standing off as far as possible from the quad. So like I said, this isn't your long range setup. You wouldn't have your crossfire antenna under here. You wouldn't have your video antenna so close to the quad. But if you're flying bandos and you're bashing around office parks and schools and lots of gnarly proximity situations, this is your built to bash Stingy V2. So I hope that you guys enjoy this. If you are interested in picking one of these up from me, I've got another 5 available that I'm going to be building in the coming week or so. We're going to be making a setup video where I go through setting it up on Betaflight 4.1 along with our RPM filters, and a whole new tuning video for me. I'm going to tune this quad with RPM filters and get it flying freaking amazing before I send it to you guys. So like I said, I got got 5 more coming up. If you guys want to get one, shoot me a message on Instagram or Facebook, because I would love for you to get to fly a Stingy built Stingy V2. All right, guys, hit that like button, subscribe, leave a comment. Let me know what you thought of the build. Let me know what I did wrong, because I know there's some finicky builders out there that'll have some ideas on what I could have done better. So let me know what you thought, and be sure to hit that bell and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on my upcoming tuning video, setup video, and more great content. You could, if you'd like to join me for my Part 107 course, I am running that through Patreon. Link in the description where you can find it on Patreon for $50 a month. We're doing a weekly stream where you come in the voice chat on Discord, and we go over one aspect each week of the Part 107. If you'll notice, I've got my airspace stream that is public. The rest of them are going to be private. It's only going to be for the people who sign up through Patreon. So if you want to get on that, don't miss out. The old streams will be available, so you're not going to miss anything. You can just keep going from where we're at in the course. And yeah, I'd love to have you as part of the 107 stream every Sunday night, doing popcorn and props right here live at Stinger Swarm. So get your edits up and bring them in so that we can check them out and watch them and talk about how epic your flying is. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed it. We will catch you next time. Later.